Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. And my co-host is Chris Buonagura, a Fantasy Intelligence Network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
So today we are going to talk about the most hot button post-draft player of 2023, everyone's favorite quarterback prospect, Anthony Richardson, and his meteoric rise to relevance in Best Ball Mania 4. He currently sits as QB 10, ADP 84.3 overall, firmly entrenched in that 7th to 8th round, and going higher. People love themselves rushing upside. This is a player, for reference, when Best Ball tournaments started for 2023 in February with contests like the Big Board on Underdog. Anthony Richardson started in the 16th round, drafted somewhere around 150, and then slowly rose. And then post-draft, it took all of about 4 days for him to be firmly entrenched in the top 100. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look and we're going to say, can we comfortably draft Anthony Richardson as the QB 10 in the 7th to 8th round of Best Ball drafts? Aaron, do you have any initial thoughts you'd like to share before I go into a rant of all rants?
I'll say that Anthony Richardson makes me a little nervous because everyone loves Richardson, right? But the profile's not perfect either. Player Profiler has the best comparable player. And of course, you can see in the top right corner that it's Josh Allen, but I also like to look at his top 5 comps in our system. So along with Josh Allen, his best comparable is then Justin Herbert, which is great, but followed by Josh Freeman, EJ Manuel, and Jeff Driscoll. I think with Jeff Driscoll, we can kind of throw him out there because unlike the other 4, they were all first-round picks. But Josh Freeman and EJ Manuel, it's been some years. But those were some rough quarterbacks there. And with Richardson, there's a sky-high upside. But man, no one is talking about the floor with Anthony Richardson. I looked at first and second round quarterbacks since 2005 at their college QBR. There's 65 QBs, including the 2023 class. His 70.6 college QBR, which is 48th percentile, ranks 50th amongst those 65. Like the only guy that was lower than him that did hit was, in fact, Josh Allen. Like it is, we got to start talking about what the floor is with Richardson. The rushing upside, he is the most athletic quarterback ever, number 1 athleticism score. But man, I'm a tad worried.
Where is the floor? WTF, dude, where's the floor? The floor is definitely in the basement, but the ceiling is certainly somewhere in a Manhattan skyrise. So it's something to discuss. So with Anthony Richardson, we're going to move forward with a compliment sandwich for the real truthers out there to not hurt their feelings. So the good, why does Anthony Richardson matter? Why he matters is because he was drafted 104 to a team with no other option. There is no Joe Flacco, right, that Lamar Jackson had his rookie season to keep him off the field. It's not Jalen Hurts who had to sit on the bench for Carson Wentz. Anthony Richardson is playing 17 games. Unless he gets injured or he commits a crime and goes to jail, he is for sure playing an entire season. Gardner Minshew is not going to outcompete Anthony Richardson, even if they give Minshew some snaps in camp. So, and with the success we've seen of other mobile quarterbacks, you definitely have to consider this player when you see the 6'4", 244 with 99th percentile athleticism. Now, the real question is the ability to throw, and we're going to compare him to most of the other relevant mobile quarterbacks that currently play and a couple from the last decade, and we're going to see how these passing profiles from college compare to Anthony Richardson, and then how quickly did these guys start dominating fantasy football? Because that's going to matter to if Anthony Richardson is a good best ball value this year, right? This isn't a dynasty take. This is best ball. So the rushing upside is not in question. It's obviously there, right? You look at the college stats, though. The rushing is good. You know, the 400, the 600 yards, it's obviously good. We see the film, we see the athleticism. But some of these other guys had much more rushing. And then you look at the passing, and it's just very, very bad. Kind of crest 60% his sophomore year, but it's on 64 pass attempts. It's a very small sample. And his one large sample size season, 53.8% completion percentage is very alarming because we know historically that quarterbacks under 60% completion percentage in college tend to be poor throwers in the NFL. The only 2,500 passing yards is rough. And, 17 passing touchdowns, not completely terrible on 327 attempts, but you'd love to see more. And with 9 interceptions is not great. He did play in the SEC. I'll give him that. So we now look at his first comp, Josh Allen, right? Josh Allen, not quite as athletic, but bigger. We've seen him run. We know he can. And we look in the NFL. He is one of the few guys where even at his worst, I mean, this is still a back-end QB1. And then since he's broken out, it's been unquestionable. Now, the completion percentages in the NFL, when they were bad, his fantasy scoring was much worse. And now that they're very good, he's elite. He doesn't necessarily run the most, but he does rush in a ton of touchdowns. And he's one of the few guys here that's consistently throwing for over 4,000 yards. We'll see that a lot of these mobile quarterbacks, they don't necessarily throw for as many yards because they spend a lot more time rushing for those yards. Allen's throwing for those yards and kind of rushing when necessary. And then, as Aaron said, Allen was a poor thrower in college. And, it shows. So, certainly a plus for Anthony Richardson, but not a plus for his year one value. And Josh Allen is an outlier. Can't chase outliers, right? We go to Lamar Jackson. Not quite as big, just as fast. Look at his NFL production. The rookie season didn't do anything, but didn't play. The minute he starts playing, he's QB1, right? He wins the MVP. It's not even close, but he never throws for a lot of yards. One season over 3,000 passing yards, but rushing for a ton of yards and rushing for a lot of touchdowns. But he's also throwing at a high completion percentage, and he's throwing touchdowns at a very high touchdown percentage, right? His touchdown efficiency is very good considering the pass attempts and passing yards. And that's something that also matters a lot for these guys' fantasy scoring. You go down to college for Lamar, and also not over 60%, but we at least see a lot more passing yards, a lot more rushing yards, and still better completion percentage numbers than Anthony Richardson's of 53.9. So again, Lamar and Josh Allen do give you hope. Now we start to look at the rest of these guys. Jalen Hurts, size, speed. We look at what he did. Once he starts playing full time, it's lights out, right? You give him even better weapons last year. He's number one. Throwing for some more yards, but also rushing for a lot. Decent on touchdowns, high completion percentage. Go to college, and he was a beast in college. I mean, over 60%, 69% his senior year at Oklahoma with 1,200 rushing yards, almost 4,000 passing yards. You can't even compare Anthony Richardson's ability to pass in college to Jalen Hurts's. I know there was the whole controversy with Tua and him getting sat, but I mean, come on, we've seen enough. Jalen Hurts is an electrifying thrower of the football. You move on to Justin Fields, right? Doesn't do really much his rookie year. Didn't fully play, but played enough where he should have done better. Does much better last year, but he did throw for 60.4% completions last year, right? With the almost 1,200 rushing yards and his touchdown efficiency, 17 touchdowns on 318 attempts. That's very good, right? And you'll see with these guys, they're not throwing for yards, but they're throwing for touchdowns. His college production, the completion percentage, again, off the charts, not running as much, not really throwing for as many yards, but he's completing passes. It's, again, not really close to Anthony Richardson. You look at Kyler Murray, you see more of the same. Comes out, he's very good out of the gate. Not throwing quite as many yards, but he does throw more, a balance of rushing. He does throw more attempts, so his touchdown efficiency is actually worse, but his completion percentage is very good, right? And then you scroll down for Kyler Murray in college, and his completion percentages and his throwing stats are amazing, right? 68%, 4,000 yards, 1,000 rushing yards, not close. Robert Griffin III, the original one of these guys, right? Old school name, 6'2", 233, 4.41 40-yard dash. Scroll down. RG3 came and lit the league on fire, man. Lit the league on fire. We got robbed, Robert Griffin III. But the completion percentage was 65.6%. 20 touchdowns, 393 pass attempts. You look at him in college, and very good passing numbers compared to Richardson. Cam Newton is another one where came in, lit the league on fire. You look at college, had 66.1% that senior year. Not a lot of yards, but 1,500 rushing yards. That's just who Cam is. Now, Cam did it in the NFL throwing very poorly. Almost never over 60%. But kind of just ran a lot and also was crushing fantasy in a time where there were no other mobile quarterbacks, right? He's going up against Carson Palmer in fantasy points per game, not 5 other elite rushing quarterbacks like in 2023. If you put these numbers in today's NFL, he's not that high. And the last one, and sadly the least one, is Tyrod Taylor, who surprisingly enough, 6'1", 215, very good athlete, man. He came in, never really did too much, but had some good years here and there, at least completion percentage-wise. Had some good fantasy years. Number 7, number 9, could run. He was a 6th-round pick compared to a lot of these other guys who were early picks. But Tyrod Taylor wasn't hitting that 60%, wasn't throwing for a lot of yards. Granted, it's Virginia Tech, it's not Florida, but these passing stats look a lot more similar to Anthony Richardson. Now, of course, like things like arm strength and pure athleticism aren't close. Not saying it's a comp, but it's something to consider. So what necessarily do we then do with Anthony Richardson at his cost? Does he light the league on fire year one? Does it take time? And how do we pepper that into a best ball lineup? So I would say at QB 10, where he currently sits, you can still draft him. It's not the worst pick. If he starts to crest Deshaun Watson and goes any earlier, like if he lands as a 6th-round pick and people keep just pulling him up, now you have to pump the brakes because there's no reason you would take him over an established mobile quarterback. There's no reason. But over a non-mobile quarterback, we do see this long history of the floor-ceiling combo. And one thing Anthony Richardson has is weapons. It might not be the sexiest athletic group in the NFL in terms of Pittman, Pierce, Josh Downs, and Jelani Woods, but it's definitely not bottom 10, right? It's somewhere at league average, and he's definitively starting and playing. Now, I love guys like Dak and Tua and Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins and Geno Smith to give you that 300 fantasy point floor that can help you advance in a best ball tournament. But Anthony Richardson could give you a Justin Fields-like season last year, where through 10 weeks, he's absolutely unusable. But then down the stretch, once he gets his legs under him, he's giving you 40-point weeks. And if Anthony Richardson gives you a 40-point week in those final weeks from a best ball strategy standpoint, then there is no too early to draft him. Now, I'm not saying go out of your way. I definitely would keep a healthy exposure. It's going to depend on team build. And I'm not going to overdraft Anthony Richardson. Like, I'm not going to start a draft with Lamar and then circle back in round 8 on Anthony Richardson. That's too expensive for quarterback. But if he ends up your QB1 in the 8th round and then you double down with some later quarterbacks to balance it out, like a Russell Wilson, and your quarterback room is Richardson Wilson, that seems like a pretty good room. It's a cautious optimism with Anthony Richardson. But if he continues to climb, I'm out. I'm not going to do it before Deshaun. I'm not going to do it in the 6th round or more expensive, because at that point, you're just not really getting the value back. You already have other guys that give you the same thing that are more established. Plenty of rushing quarterbacks in the NFL this year.
Yeah, and we already know that Richardson is going to rise because Deshaun Watson's only the difference is about 3 picks. And this is what's going to happen. The show has been a spoiler for people, right? Like, people are going to go, oh, Deshaun Watson disappointed last season. But Richardson, brand new shiny toy, I'll take a flyer on that. Richardson will leapfrog Deshaun Watson. And when that happens and that ADP continues to rise for Richardson, as you said, that's when we go, we're out. Like, that's a difficult price to pay, because even with Josh Allen, his best comparable player, first couple of seasons in the NFL, he finishes QB 14 and QB 11, right? Here we are already taking Richardson as QB 10, probably QB 9, and there's even a chance. Who knows how much he continues to rise? He could then go QB 8. So watch the ADP with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, QB 10 is perfect. It's the highest I'm willing to go, but still draftable. Now, his weapons is something else to look at. So Michael Pittman, right? His wide receiver one, my favorite player last year who burned me. And looking at Michael Pittman now, I mean, when you look at Underdog and you go to wide receiver, he is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 28, which is okay. ADP 55 is still a little rich, but wide receiver 28 is not unreasonable when you factor in that the last 2 seasons he finished as wide receiver 21 and 22 by PPR points per game, commands a lot of targets. If anyone follows Matt Harmon's reception perception, you know that he's a very elite route runner. He's certainly a very good player, but this is a guy last year that I thought was going to ascend to be the next Mike Evans and be a definitive wide receiver one. When you look at the efficiency metrics and the whole profile, you have to take him out of the wide receiver one conversation. At this point, he's a very good wide receiver two in the NFL at best, because you look at it from last year, 141 targets on a 25.6% target share is very good, running a ton of routes, participating in 100% of the Colts routes. And despite this, he has a 6.9 average depth of target. That's the same as Amon-Ra St. Brown that we said a couple of weeks ago we didn't love. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown had elite yards after the catch. Michael Pittman doesn't. 346, number 20th overall in yards after the catch on 141 targets. That's not very good. It's okay. It's a wide receiver 2. It's not a wide receiver 1. 5 deep targets. 108th in deep targets on 141 targets. 5 deep targets. That's unbearably low. You look at his efficiency metrics, and there's nothing that pops off the page. Now, we see the total points. We know the route running. You can kind of take the efficiency with a grain of salt, but what really hurts is the 5 deep targets. Now, you might say, but Chris, they had Matt Ryan, who aged out halfway through the season, and Sam Ettinger. They couldn't throw the ball deep. How is he going to earn deep targets? Well, let's look at Alec Pierce, 6'3", 208. Actually, a really good athlete. 2nd-round pick. Earned 77 targets last year on a 14% target share. He had 14 deep targets on 77 targets. 3 times the amount of deep targets as Pittman on half the overall targets. Clearly, they could throw it deep. Maybe not super well, but they could. Now, Pierce's catchable target rate was number 56, and his targets were deeper, so they obviously weren't the best targets. But you look at Michael Pittman, his catchable target rate was 85.1%, number 11th in the NFL. Now, he had terrible quarterbacks. How were his targets so catchable? Well, he was being targeted 6 yards off the line of scrimmage. It's pretty catchable when it's 6 yards off the line of scrimmage. So it's something to consider that when we look at this profile, we have to put a ceiling now that is outside the range of wide receiver ones. So when I'm drafting and it's the 5th round and Michael Pittman's on the board, it's not necessarily a bust, but I want a guy in the 5th round that will outplay his ADP, that has a chance to be a high-end wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 1. That's Chris Godwin. That's Brandon Ayuk, right? That's Mike Evans, potentially Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin. You know, these guys have shown us more of a well-rounded skill set. I'm not saying don't draft Michael Pittman, but certainly draft him far less. Don't reach on him. Don't go out of your way. Don't enter a draft room saying, I really want to stack Pittman with Anthony Richardson in this draft. Don't feel like you have to stack them. If there's any player you don't have to correlate, it's a mobile quarterback, because a mobile quarterback will have 40-point weeks where he does all the running and all the touchdown scoring with his legs, and none of his receivers feast, and they all stink that week, but the quarterback still won you money.
Yeah, and to mention with receivers too, with Michael Pittman in particular, you're going to see him in best ball drafts. You're going to go, wow, Michael Pittman, wide receiver 28, this is excellent value. And I'm with you we don't want to avoid him, but here's the reality. Past 2 seasons, it's been perfect scenarios for Michael Pittman in terms of volume. Top 15 in targets and receptions both seasons. Both those years, he's finished outside the top 20 in PPR. Underdog is half PPR. Surely he finishes lower than that the past 2 seasons than he did in PPR leagues. Also, last season, the Colts, who are a terrible team, top 10 team in pass plays per game. The year before, they were number 20 in pass plays per game. more than likely they're going to fall somewhere in the middle, and I think it's going to be closer to number 20 in an Anthony Richardson-led offense. We just saw it with Richardson's profile. He didn't pass for a lot of yards, right? Like, it's not going to be the passing game. So Pittman, don't avoid, but you don't want too much exposure. And Alec Pierce, I've kind of come around on a little bit. Hey, everyone talks about Richardson and that rocket arm that he has. Alec Pierce, a couple of the advanced metrics that stood out to me. He was number 36 in expected points added. He was number 41 in route win rate. Like, he was making positive impacts as a rookie second round pick. And if he does take a step up, especially at his ADP, he's wide receiver 63 in best ball, 143.9. He's going at the tail end of the 12th round right now in the current tournament. Probably slides to 13th round, maybe even 14th round. Like Alec Pierce, there are people that just don't want him at all. They'll just focus on Michael Pittman. So if Pierce starts to slide, sure. The guy that's running deep routes on a team that should be playing from behind and a quarterback that can throw deep, I don't mind taking a stab on Alec Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, 6'3", 208 is the same or a very similar height and weight that Quentin Johnston's coming in as. And Alec Pierce is actually more athletic. And he was a second round pick. I mean, that's not awful draft capital. Now it's late second round, which isn't typically amazing for receivers the last couple of years, but it's certainly on the radar. And I mean, 77 targets and 14% target share. There's plenty of rookies that build on that going into their sophomore year. That's not something where you look at it and you say, wow, Alec Pierce is the next DK Metcalf. Like, of course not. But Alec Pierce is on the radar, man. He can carve out a role as a wide receiver 3 or potentially a wide receiver 2 on a team. We'll have to see what he does his sophomore year, but I agree. I think he's a very nice value, and he's kind of the Colts receiver you would want to target, especially if he falls past ADP. Very unlikely he gets more expensive, and you can make the argument that when plays get off script and Anthony Richardson is forced out of the pocket, it's an Alec Pierce running 40 yards down the field, 20 yards down the field, who will find a way to get open more so than a Michael Pittman, who's a design route runner. Now, the other relevant receiver would be Josh Downs, who has had a small climb since the draft. Well, I'm sorry, he initially had a massive fall. He was being drafted around Alec Pierce before the draft, dropped to near pick 200, and is now slowly climbing again. Probably doesn't get much more expensive, but he's wide receiver 72, ADP 167. People who have followed us this offseason know that pre-draft, I loved Josh Downs, one of my favorite guys, but you have to adjust as information comes your way. And the late second round, the early third round pick, I mean, well, really that's mid third round. The mid third round pick for the Colts is objectively awful for Josh Downs. Josh Downs was a fringe size with a nice receiving profile from college, really good catch rates and target shares, but he does profile as a slot guy, and to not get more elite draft capital is the NFL telling you how they feel, and he does have to fall. And to be honest, I've only drafted Josh Downs once in 15 drafts since the NFL draft, and that's because he fell to pick 200. And in the last round of a best ball draft, sure, I'll take a shot that Josh Downs can still actualize a Wan'Dale Robinson level of value, but I'm not taking him at his ADP. Not in a team that's going to project to run the ball, maybe at the heaviest clip of the NFL behind the Falcons. And he's the third, potentially fourth target here. And Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman are legitimately good players. So very little to like with Downs.
And the other thing with Downs, too, is that in the offseason, the Colts signed Isaiah McKenzie. And yes, like McKenzie's not the most amazing receiver in the NFL, but they both play the same role. It's a slot receiver. Alec Pierce, as the deep threat, there isn't anyone that is going to push him for his playing time and his role as being the starting stretch receiver. Same with Michael Pittman as that low ADOT, probably more of a flanker receiver. And I will say, I love Downs, the rookie profile. Pre-draft, he was my wide receiver 5. But the truth is, that mid third round draft capital does not guarantee him anything in the NFL as a rookie. McKenzie could very well be the slot receiver the entire year. I feel like Downs will get a chance, but it's probably more of a coin flip than we want to admit. So yeah, with Josh Downs and that ADP, I'm just avoiding, even though he's dirt cheap.
Yeah, the selling point for Wan'Dale Robinson last year was I'm pretty sure he was a second-round pick, and the Giants had nobody else. The Colts have plenty. Even Ashton Doolin is not a nobody. Now, he's like a fringe NFL starter, but he's NFL caliber nonetheless. And then we look at the tight end room, and everyone's hot onto Jelani Woods. And, I like Jelani Woods. Me and Aaron are notorious fans of Jonnu Smith, and this is another one of those Jonnu Smith 6'7", 252 freak athlete type tight ends that are so exciting. And we just want to see every single one of these guys be George Kittle and Travis Kelce, but very few of them are. Jelani Woods is a sophomore tight end. I'm typically not targeting tight ends in the first 3 years of their career in a redraft setting unless they're really special or they've shown us special or they're higher draft picks, right? 40 targets, 25 receptions. It's nice. He's not a nobody. He certainly has some good efficiency metrics that you can look at. He earned 5 deep targets on only 40 targets. It's a much higher rate than Michael Pittman. And, his average target distance was good, once again proving this team was throwing it further than 6 yards. And in terms of relative to tight ends, he was 8th in yards per reception, 15th in yards per route run, so on and so forth. But it wasn't a lot of routes. And where people are taking him, he's not going as expensive now. He was much more expensive earlier in this offseason. But it's just a player that does not really excite me at all. I'm not going out of my way to really put him on rosters because it just feels like almost a zero. Now, tight end 30, 210 ADP. He is a last round pick. If you want to take a shot on a Jelani Woods finding the end zone 5 or 6 times, maybe Jonathan Taylor gets hurt and they start incorporating him in the run game or in short yardage situations, that's fine. But he doesn't really profile for this type of offense to get a lot of receiving work. And the community seems to know that. If you walk out of this offseason with 0% Jelani Woods, you're probably not going to regret it. And I'm certainly going to walk out with 0% Woods in Best Ball Mania 4. This is a guy you stash on like a deep dynasty team.
And the only thing I'll add with Jelani Woods is we always talk about how rookie tight ends, it usually takes 2 to 3 years to finally put it together. And Woods definitely flashed as a rookie, but the end of the day, he split work with Mo Alley Cox and Kylan Granson. And Jelani Woods has only been a tight end since 2021, his final season in college. He was a quarterback, converted to receiver, went to a new school, converted to tight end. So what that's telling you is 2023 is his 3rd season ever playing tight end. Whereas we talk about players that are tight ends taking 2 to 3 years in the pros to learn how to play tight end in the NFL. Jelani Woods can't get upset with people taking a dart throw at that ADP, but it's going to be one of those that's probably a year early on Jelani Woods.
Yeah, there's really not much else to say on Woods, but that's pretty much the crux of it with where I see the Colts for this offseason. Right now, there's still good value here. Anthony Richardson is draftable, but be wary of the price going up. I don't think the current price is unrealistic given the history we've seen. If you do get him in the 8th round, and if he falls past his ADP, definitely take him. And, Pittman, I'm not going crazy for. And I think a couple of upside shots on Alec Pierce is reasonable. Otherwise, the Colts are a team for 2023. If anyone really is going to make a splash, it's Anthony Richardson. The rest probably leave you with very little to enjoy.
And if you're watching the show on YouTube, we also do the show live on Discord. You should join our Discord server, and here's the reason why. We do bonus content for the people supporting us on Discord. We take questions. We help you with your best ball decisions. We even take some dynasty questions. So make sure you go to playerprofiler.com/chat to join the Player Profiler Discord and come support our show live on Discord. Thank you so much for supporting us. Like, comment, subscribe, and we bid you adieu.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.